1 minute we are looking January 2024 down the barrel, and the next minute we are staring quite quickly at January 2025. Not quite sure where the last 12 months have gone, but it is time to do my 2024 highs and lows when it comes to reading. So let's get going. Hey everyone, it's Ray. Welcome to my more festive looking bookish corner of the world, and it is time for me to go through my countdown. This year I have not got piles of books. They are sitting on the shelf because I figured that you didn't need to see me holding a book saying, this is the book I'm talking about. I'm just going to put a picture up there so you can see, especially as I have actually unhauled a few of these in the last few months. I'm going to start with a few of my favorites. I am going to finish with my top read, one that I honestly recommend you pick up if you haven't done so already. And the rest of them are going to be in no particular order, though I am going to try and separate my top from my bottom, plus a few honorary mentions that kind of maybe should be on my personal list, and I'd love to hear what is on yours. So here we go. In my favorites list, because I figured I'm going to start with some really good stuff, I'm going to end with some really good stuff, and I'm going to sandwich in the books that I wasn't so keen on. I know that a lot of people are saying, oh, you should be really positive and don't talk about the ones you don't want, that you don't think people should read. I'm not ever going to say I don't think you should read these. I know that reading as a subject is incredibly subjective. It is down to personal opinion. There is no right or wrong. These are just my views. So you can take them or leave them. I'm fine with that. But I would love to hear if you think that any of mine are on your list, or any you think I've left any off, or you think I've put them on the wrong list altogether, because that is possible. You may absolutely love a book I don't, and I may love a book you think, oh my god, really, you liked that? So let's get going. First on my list is actually a relatively recent read, and I have done a very recent YouTube podcast episode on it, and that is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. It's the first in his library trilogy, with the second one, The Book That Broke the World, and the third one is I can't even remember the title, that is so bad, but it comes out in April 2025. So this is the story of Levira, who is a dust dweller who is kidnapped by the Cannith, or the Sabbers as they refer to them, their enemies, and witnesses a lot of horrific death before she is rescued by a soldier of the city of Crath, Malar, who is then in turn rescued by Levira when he is swallowed by a dust bear. He sees something in her and persuades her to makes it possible that she gets a better position when they return to Crath City, and she goes through the training to become a librarian, despite many people finding that her upbringing is not something they are massively keen on. I'm not going to go into the entire story, but I will say I think that the world was very well crafted. I enjoyed reading the book. It took me a little bit of time to get into, but then I do believe that this was because we were reading a lot about the world building. There was an incredible amount of development at the start of the story, learning about the past of the city, learning about the past of the dust dwellers and the Cannith, the Sabba enemy, and also which made the twist at the end all that much more emotional. I enjoyed reading the twist, and I think that it is one of those books that was so brilliantly written that if you enjoy high fantasy, have read the world of Frank Herbert and Dune, though I'm not saying it's exactly the same as that, then this is a book you may well get some enjoyment out of. It came out in 2023 with the sequel being released earlier this year, and as I said, the final book in the trilogy comes out in April 2025. So there's something else to look forward to. But I would definitely say The Book That Wouldn't Burn deserves to be on my top 10 list. The next book on my top 10 list is Goodbye Birdie Greenwing by Erica Waller. This book made me cry a lot. I read it relatively as soon as it came out. I have spoken with Erica. She's in a book group that I participate in, and it was one of those books. It's about this elderly lady called Birdie she is actually been diagnosed with cancer, and she lives alone. Talks about her past. Sadly, her husband and her sister died in a car accident, so she is completely isolated. And then new neighbours move in next door, a woman and her daughter, and they help her. They get to know her. They encourage her. She starts to live a life before she knows her time is up. And it's all about these people in this community that group together, and it's such a lovely book and a lovely way to live your life. I grew up in a neighborhood that was very much like that. We didn't lock our front doors. We did know every single person who lived in the street. But then that was the 80s, and that was how people lived. So it was a nice reminiscence and a nice return to that. And I would recommend, if you like a book that's going to make you cry just a little bit, and you love development of strong-willed, determined characters, then this is definitely the way to go. The next book is actually the sequel to a book that was on my 2023 list, and that is Sunbringer, the second in a series by Hannah Kaner. The final book comes out next year. It's called Faithbreaker. This is the story of Kisun, Inara, and Skedaseth, and Elo Elagast, who are on a journey. They're on a quest. They all have the same goal, but they are in some ways they work against each other, but they work together. And I love this found family element to it. It is a really good fantasy world. Again, it's down to the world building, which I feel several books have lacked in the last couple of years. I'm not looking at Ruthless Vows and Divine Rivals here, but I am going to slightly mention that they did lack this, in my opinion. I loved the world building. I found it was a great strength to this story, and I'm looking forward to reading the sequel when it comes out in March 2025. So that is Sunbringer. The next one was a surprise to me. It was actually a book that I did for a blog tour, and that is Costanza by Rachel Blackmore. I love the story of, well, I don't love the story of, but I love the art of Bernini. It's found in innumerable places in Rome. He was a favourite of the Pope at the time, and I always had no idea of all the things that went on underneath the surface of this particular character, because I was just interested in his art. And I will put a few pictures up so you can see the detail that he put into these stunning marble sculptures is incredible. But he was a horrible person. This book highlights the kind of man he was. So it also brings about the question of art and artist and separating the two, because when it comes to this particular person, you really have to separate him from the beauty that he created, because he was not a beautiful person underneath the surface. And Costanza is the story of his one-time mistress, someone he feels has cheated on him, when in actual fact she is assaulted by his brother who lusts after her. His brother then tells him, oh, she's decided she wants to be with me. And in punishment, he has her physically assaulted and scarred for life. And it then talks about the punishment that she goes through, because in that particular period of time, women were treated like worse than dirt. If they were found to be unfaithful to their husband, they were the ones punished, not the person they cheated with. If their husband cheated on them, they were fine. So it was that imbalance, and this book goes into that in considerable detail. It's a very well written historical novel, and it is based on actual facts. So Yes, Bernini was an incredibly talented artist, but he was not a nice person. And this was something that made me think several times about the fact that I had travelled to Rome with a friend specifically to see his sculpture. And now I wonder if I'd do the same thing, because yes, separating art from artist is important, but also the underlying what you did was horrific. So that is book 4. And the 5th book, before I start talking about the wonder that is the not so good books in my view, is The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. I read this one relatively close to the beginning of the year. It was a massively anticipated novel, and the promos for it that were done back in 2023 really made you want to read the book. It is very similar in many ways to something written by Tom Holt quite a few years ago, which was a satirical science fiction where there is, in this case, it was a door that opened to multiple places, but this is about a book that opens doors to multiple places. And this young lady who works in a bookshop, she's on pretty hard times. She is gifted this book by the previous owner, and she finds herself in the middle of a rather tense war between people who possess books that have various powers. So it was almost like it was highlighting books, words, so the power of the word. And this particular novel seems to really stress that, because each of these books has a specific power, and it is something that many covet, because the more books they possess, the more power they hold. And this was what that book was about. It'd be very interesting to see if they do a sequel, but it ended on a very good note. So I would recommend that if you like something that is quite complicated, but not so complicated that you get stuck in the convoluted area, then it's definitely one to read. So that was the first 5. And I haven't mentioned my number 1. That is going to be the last book I mention. So I'm now going to talk about my least favourite books. And it took me a while. The funny thing is, I've actually read quite a number of books that I didn't really think were peak amazing, but they weren't horrific. And courtesy of Storygraph, I've been able to rate them far more accurately. So a book that I think is a 3.5, not a 4, I've been able to rate that way, which I really appreciate. So they're not on the list because they are 3.5s, and I think a 3.5 is still good. It is not halfway. It's not quite average. It's a pretty good, but it's not good enough for 4. So these are books that are actually rated 1 and lower, and I don't like doing that. I have to be honest, I don't like rating a book 1 or lower, and quite often this year I've managed to DNF a couple, and I will be talking about those as well, and I find it very difficult to do so. But if an author has made the effort to write the book, just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not good. It just means I didn't like it. So the books that I didn't like personally were, the first one was The Kingdom is a Golden Cage by Lily Inkwood, which was a kind of retelling, I think, of a German fairy tale. I know that the sequel is actually the prequel, and it's it's using the fairy tale of Rapunzel. It was Puss in Boots. There you go. It was Puss in Boots. And I'm not massively familiar with the original tale of Puss in Boots. I had to look it up, and then you find out that Puss in Boots is actually horrific. He's a massive liar, and he lies in order to get his master power. And in this case, it is the main character's lover is turned into a cat, but it turns out that he's actually a huge liar and has been manipulating her all along. I didn't like the writing. I found that the world building, I've mentioned world building several times in this where it's been really good. The world building in this is lacking massively, and I hate the fact that it had so much potential to be a really good story. But instead of giving us the backstory, instead of building the characters up and giving us their origin tales, it dumped us into this world and gave us nothing. And I found that very frustrating and very confusing. And it made it so that I didn't sit there and go, I really want to read the rest of this. it turns out that there's a really long character list at the beginning of the book, and this character list is of no use to you in the story because the vast majority of the characters that are mentioned are only in there so you've got your backstory and you don't get anything else. So that for me was lacking, and it was a book that I unhauled relatively quickly after reading it. And I have to say that I will not be reading the first book, which came out, I believe, in like September, October time, 2024. I just think that if the first one had been, if the sequel had been released first, we'd have got the backstory that we apparently needed in order to make the second story make more sense. So that was The Kingdom is a Golden Cage. The second book was Worst Idea Ever by Jane Fallon. This was one of my 1-star review picks. I picked it from the jar using 1-star reviews. I will post a link to one of those videos above because I think it was an interesting way to get through some of my TBR without being biased in any way by the cover, by the author, by the storyline. I literally have one line of a review and the book is assigned a number and I just pick it out off the shelf. And for Worst Idea Ever was the worst case of gaslighting, toxic friendships, and toxic people in general I think I have read this year, and that is saying something. That it was, these two friends should never have been friends in the first place. It made you wonder how they'd managed to maintain contact without punching each other in the face. So it was a book that I really didn't enjoy, and I thought, no, I'm not going to read it again. I'm not going to read anything else by her. And I've actually unhauled, sadly, the other 2 books I had on my shelf by Jane Fallon because this one book made me actually doubt myself for a very long time. The main character has self-doubt. She is a talented artist who's never succeeded in anything. She's single. Her friend is very successful by chance. Happy marriage, 2 children, dog, nice house. And in order to give her friend confidence, she creates a fake persona online, tells her friend how amazing she is and how talented, gets her friend a contact within her own publishers, acknowledging the fact that her friend is far more talented than she is at that moment in time. And then when her friend realizes that she's being gaslit by this friend, that she feels sorry for her, she turns the tables. And then this friend, realizing that the other friend has turned the tables on her and has realized that she's been gaslighting her all this time, tries to do her best to destroy her career, and actually makes a point earlier on in the book in saying, oh, well, when this one person did this to me years ago, I blocked her after telling her what I thought. And you sit there thinking, okay, so you are a nasty person in general then. And I just after that point, I thought to myself, why am I reading this? I managed to finish it because it was a book that I had committed to reading, but never again. So that was Worst Idea Ever. The next one was Every Exquisite Thing by Laura Stephen, which was a gender-reversed portrait of Dorian Gray. I said Dorian Gray because I was thinking Birds of a Feather. It was a gender-switched portrait of Dorian Gray, but it was teenagers, and these teenagers were so self-obsessed. They were in a drama school. This girl had got her place in the drama school because of her mother, who was already famous, and there's a lot of weird death, conspiracy, hidden chamber under the school, and their power, their success comes from a portrait that they have painted if they are chosen. And the main character is so narcissistic. You can't feel anything for her, even after everything starts to go wrong for her. You're sort of like, you brought it on yourself, dearie. It wasn't very well written, and in my opinion, and I'm not a huge fan of the Portrait of Dorian Gray anyway. It's not one of the novels that I really like, but it may have been a fair approximation. It just felt very Gossip Girl, and that didn't sit well with me. Maybe I'm the wrong audience for it. So that was book 3. Book 4 is Lady Macbethad by Isabel Schuler. I'm not quite sure what I didn't like about this. I think that it was the fact that there was so much left out. It was the story of Lady Macbeth before she became Lady Macbeth. And it was told as though there is no information available about this woman that really existed, when there are documents aplenty. Shakespeare wrote a play about her, or about her husband and herself, and there is loads of information because she really existed. So there were certain changes that were made to history that didn't feel appropriate. There were certain changes made to the story in order to make it about female empowerment that felt unnecessary, because she was a very strong woman, and there's no ignoring the fact that she was a very strong woman. And it just, for me, it didn't work. That was it. It just didn't work for me. And the final book on my I wasn't really a fan list is actually Fair Rosaline by Natasha Solomons. I am not a fan of Romeo and Juliet, the play by Shakespeare. It is one of those plays I think ended... It was a stupid storyline. Boy meets girl. They're both young teens. Boy meets girl. Boy falls in love with girl. They're from enemy families within Verona. And at the end of it, someone's dead. That's not a love story. That's a tragedy beyond extremes. But in this one, we have Rosaline, who is mentioned just twice, I believe, in the play, Shakespeare's play. And she is the hero of the piece. She is Juliet's cousin. She is originally involved with Romeo, but she gets wise to the fact that he is actually part of a trafficking ring led by the families of Verona, and enabled by the friar that ends up marrying Romeo and Juliet, the one who helps them to meet. And she uncovers all of this, rescues her cousin, and yeah, the whole thing's ridiculous. It absolutely is ridiculous. And I think for me, the author notes were the bit that did me in. It's talking about how her one of her relatives is a social care worker, and the whole storyline of Romeo and Juliet felt like abuse and everything else. Romeo is not much older than Juliet in the play. They are of a similar age, yet in this they have him as a much older predator, and it just felt gratuitous. It was unnecessary. So I honestly didn't want to see it. I'm currently looking at it. Both it and Lady Macbethad are on my unhaul shelf, which in the new year I will be taking to a charity shop, and they are right at eye level. So yeah, they are books that I am not interested in reading again, and for me personally, they just were really unnecessary. But now we've done the bad. We've done all the bad. I can now talk about the good again, because I have got 5 more really good, plus a few honorary mentions, which I will go into before I get to my number 1 read, because there is a number 1, and I am... Yeah, it's... If any of you have listened to me or watched me before, you probably already know what my number 1 read is. But my number 6 good book, or number 5 if we're counting downwards, but there is no count until the number 1 anyway, is Cat Among the Pigeons by Agatha Christie. I hadn't actually read this one before, and it was one I read as part of the 12 reads of Agatha for 2024. The Agatha Christie read along, which is organised by the Agatha Christie Society over on Instagram every single year. And I took part this year. It was about the decades, and this was one of the books I picked up because I'd read the book already for that particular month and that particular decade. It is based in a private school in England. It's a Poirot mystery, which should be second guessed anyway, because they are my favourites. And it is a kind of mystery about missing jewelry. Something is smuggled out of one of the Middle Eastern countries, and there is a missing girl. A girl goes missing, but she doesn't really go missing, and another girl goes off to elicit Poirot's help in order to find this friend and save her from potential danger, because she knows where the jewels are. There are 2 murders in the school, and the school is threatened with closure because it's no longer a safe place to be. And it's just, there are so many twists and turns, as there tend to be in Agatha Christie books, especially the ones written in the sort of 40s, 50s and 60s, far more so than her later novels and her really early ones. And I really enjoyed the twists that we got, and the fact that Poirot was in there. He knew exactly what was going on. He knew where the missing jewels were relatively quickly, but he took his time in revealing why the murders happened, who actually carried them out, and why they were done the way they were in the supply shed at the private school. So he saved the day, as he tends to, and it was a really interesting book. I loved the way it was done. I enjoyed the characters, and I always enjoy Poirot. The next one is actually Ghostsmith, which is the sequel to Bonesmith by Nikki Palpretto. So the final book in the House of the Dead duology that she started in 2023. This was a fantastic close to the series. It highlighted many family issues that you didn't realise were actually going to crawl out of the caves, as it were. And we get a final confrontation between our character's mother and father, which was what started things in the first place. It was a brilliant end to the series. And I don't want to talk about it too much because I really want you to read it. I think it's hugely underrated. I think that there were so many books came out at the same time as Bonesmith and Ghostsmith that people were overwhelmed. We had Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, another couple of books in a series by Sarah J. Maas. We had Empire of the Damned came out. There were so many new books coming out in the fantasy genre that Bonesmith and Ghostsmith kind of got overlooked. Yes, a special edition did come out courtesy of Fairy Loot. I managed to get the first one, but I didn't get the second. And the covers themselves are stunning. The actual graphics on the front of the books are beautiful, but they didn't get the same fanfare as other books did. So the fact that these came out and they were almost overlooked is not exactly understandable, but it is something that does tend to happen. And the next book is another fantasy. It wasn't exactly overlooked, but I do think that it could have got more attention. It was recently part of the Reader's Choice Awards on Goodreads. Sadly, it didn't win. I feel that it was shortchanged in that respect, and that was Voyage of the Damned by Frances White. It's an interesting book. It is based on a voyage. It's described almost as Agatha Christie on a boat in fantasy, because obviously we did have Agatha Christie on a boat because we had we had Death on the Nile, and that took place on a boat. But this is almost Agatha Christie on a boat with teenagers, and these are young people who are representatives of their nations. They are all given special gifts courtesy that they receive special gifts as part of they are hereditary, and they are supposed to present or protect their people. Unfortunately, one of the teenagers on the boat has been lying about the fact that they've got their special power. They haven't received it yet, or they may not receive it ever. They aren't sure. And then deaths start occurring on the boat, where all of these people in power happen to be, and they leave this one child basically who has no powers to solve all the mysteries. And that's where the Agatha Christie-esque thing comes into play. It is a very interesting way to resolve a murder, and people continue to die even as the murders are being solved. So he's in a tenuous situation in that he doesn't have any powers, so he's got nothing to protect him, yet he is the one who's expected to confront these dangerous people and get the right responses. It was an interesting book, and I do feel that it got shortchanged when it came to the Goodreads Choice Awards, because it was a very good debut, but it was also a good fantasy novel. And my final book, before we get to the honorary mentions and my number one read of the year, is Queen of Poisons by Robert Thorogood. I've been very open about enjoying the Marlowe mysteries since the Marlowe Murder Club, since they were first released a few years ago. And this third book in the series was no different. I'm looking forward to The Belle of Marlowe, which comes out in hardback. It's already out in hardback and it comes out in paperback next year. I'm looking forward to it because I need my set to match, so it has to be a paperback version. But I enjoy the stories of Bex, Suze and Judith. I think that they are they've got brilliant chemistry together. They are able to solve the mysteries without being too over the top. It's almost Death in Paradise-esque with the comedy, with the camaraderie, and the TV series that was released earlier this year with Samantha Bond in the role of Judith. I wasn't quite sure about it, and I will talk about it in more detail at a later date, but it was well cast, and we got the entire story of the first book, The Marlowe Murder Club, in the show. So it'll be interesting to see how they do the other ones going forward, or if they are going to do the other ones going forward. I appreciated the storyline. I appreciated the way that they actually did this whole murder, because of course Suze is actually at the event where the murder takes place, and she is considered a potential suspect as well as somebody who has insight into what occurred. So they have somebody on the inside, as it were, to help them. And then they are presented with ID so they can go in and investigate it on their own. They are intrepid investigators, and I love that about Beck, Susan, Judith, and I am looking forward to reading more. So that was the third book in the series, The Queen of Poisons by Robert Thorogood. Now, I have a couple of honorary mentions and I have a couple of DNFs because I think I should mention them. I don't often DNF books. I try and avoid DNFing them where at all possible because, as I've said already, an author has taken the time to write the book. I should at least give it a fair try. However, this year I struggled with two books in particular. The first of my DNFs was Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I really wished I'd liked it. I enjoyed Love Theoretically. In fact, I preferred that to The Love Hypothesis. And I liked her short stem novellas as well. But for some reason, Not in Love, which apparently was one that she was encouraged to write by her fans, didn't work for me. In the same way that Bride didn't work for me, I found the concept of Bride worked really well. I've read a lot of books where vampires and werewolves... Who hasn't read a lot of books where vampires and werewolves are love rivals or in a relationship or interested in each other? I mean, you only have to look at things like Twilight, or... I'm trying to think. I've got several books. The book The Women of the Other World by Kelly Armstrong is full of vampires and werewolves and witches and everything else. For some reason, Bride didn't work for me, yet I struggled through and I finished it. I've now gifted it to my niece, who was very, very grateful when I gave it to her because she's looking for more Ali Hazelwood to read. But Not in Love just didn't work. It felt so different from the content that I'm used to from her. And while I like change and I appreciate change in an author when they are working to do it for a reason, this felt like it was purely written for the fans who had said, we want to see more smut. It was two POVs. The characters weren't likable for me. They didn't gel. And the story just didn't work from my perspective. I got about 140 pages in And I finally persuaded myself that I didn't like it enough to carry on, so it went straight on the unhaul shelf, and that's where it will stay until I take it to a charity shop. I know that other people absolutely loved it and they appreciate this change in style from her, but for me it just didn't work. The next book that I am unhauling and I DNF'd was actually The Trial by Rob Rinder. I don't think I even made it to 100 pages in this book before I gave a deep sigh of regret and put the book down. It took me a long time to get to that point, and when I finally admitted to myself I wasn't going to get any further, I felt relief, but I also was very happy with myself for saying, no, enough is enough, put it down, walk away and find something else. I'm not sure what it was about this book that didn't work for me exactly. I think it may have been a combination of the character and the writing. It was very, very front loaded with a lot of heavy facts. The characters didn't feel that great to me. They didn't work on paper, and I wasn't interested in finding out what was going to happen next. I know that several have said these books are really good, that they are based on his real life experiences because he was a lawyer, a solicitor at certain points in his career. But for me, it just wasn't what I wanted to read. So I ended up putting it down, and I feel very good for having done so. I was able to pick up something that I enjoyed far more in the interim. So those were my two only DNFs. I'm hoping that this coming year I'm not going to encounter anywhere near as many books that I nearly don't finish, or I don't feel like I want to finish. But I also want to acknowledge that self-love is important, and I am going to put a book down if it isn't working for me. Something that I'm not very good at. I need to get better at, because I know that life is too short to read a load of stuff you don't enjoy. And that is the lesson I'm going to take away from this particular exercise. So my honorary mentions go to 4 books. The first one is Polo by Jilly Cooper. I have just finished recording a video, which possibly will go out before this one, about the TV show Rivals, which is also the book that comes before Polo. And I reread this for the first time in probably 15 years, and I still really love the characters. It's my I honestly think it is my favourite in the Rutshire Chronicles. There's something about it. Rupert Campbell Black is still in the book. He is still in the picture. There is a certain amount of him within the book because he is a relevant part of the story and the development of the story. But the main characters are Ricky France Lynch, Luke Emerson, and Perdita McLeod. They are the central characters in this book, and it is all about Polo. No, it is not the miniseries that was on Netflix for Prince Harry. It shows the depth of research that Jilly Cooper goes to whenever she writes a novel, and I have done a full review of Polo, which I am going to link up there so you can give it a listen if you're interested. Obviously, it's completely spoiler free, so you won't find out the twists and turns, or at least you won't find out all of them, but hopefully it will encourage you to read it if you are at all interested. The next book is actually fantasy, and it's Chinese fantasy. It's based on a Chinese myth, and that is 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. It was poetic. It was beautiful. The world building was stunning. The characters were intriguing, and I loved every minute of it. I also read the sequel, and I have got the 3rd book, which is also considered a sort of prequel, on my shelf ready to read. In fact, it's over on the other shelf because I have got so many special editions with colouring on them that they now go quite a way around the room. But 6 Crimson Cranes was a stunning first book in a duology that could be considered a trilogy, and I am greatly looking forward to the next book that she has got coming out in January this year. January next year, not this year. I'm getting a bit confused about what time of year we're now in. The next book I've got is actually completely different to all the others that I've talked about so far, and that is How to Become a Dark Lord and Die Trying by Django Wexler. All I can say about this book is it reminded me in many ways of a lot of radio plays that I've listened to, especially The Sofa of Time, which was a comedy with Nick Frost. It was a single series and it was hilariously funny, and it was based in this interesting other world that they accessed through a locker in their work canteen. But this particular book is all about this one single character who finds herself stuck in a time loop in another dimension. And she keeps on making the same mistakes over and over again. And every single time she dies, she gets sent right back to the very beginning. She is battling a Dark Lord. And then on this one turn around, she says, well, what happens if I decide I'm going to become the Dark Lord? And we end up on this entire journey that has several resets where she befriends people to get them to adhere to her wishes and to follow her in her campaign to become a Dark Lord and take part in the actual events that will turn her into a Dark Lord at the very end of this journey. And it's really funny story. There is a lot of backstory. We've got a lot of world building. And of course, there's every single time you go round, different things happen, but then you don't get the repeat story. You get the, well, I learned that on that journey, so I'm not going to do it again. And we get this continuation of a story, even as we know that she has repeated her own journey at some point. So that is How to Become a Dark Lord and Die Trying by Django Wexler, which is the third of my honorary mentions. So now I've done all of those, it is time for me to talk about my one favourite book of 2024. Yes, I have got others, but there is one book that I have to place above all others because I think personally it was better. And if you know me at all, you will know what it is without me saying it, but I'm going to. It is Babylonia by Costanza Casati. Last year, Clytemnestra was my number one read, and it really was my number one read. And Babylonia I had been anticipating for a while because Costanza Casati kept on posting little excerpts and hints about the book on her Instagram. And it was everything that she promised. It was an incredible story of a strong woman in history, the first and only female ruler of Babylonia, at a time when the empire was incredibly large and incredibly powerful. It mentioned her story from the time that her mother basically tarnished her entire life or her reputation by killing her father and then killing herself and leaving the main character Semiramis on a rock to be found by a fisherman in a village, who then brought her home and treated her like his child, which basically meant he used her as a servant until he could marry her off for money. And it talks about, and the story is told of how she found her way to power, how she found love and respect. More than anything, it was respect, and she achieved her goals. It was a really well written story. I honestly think that you should read it if you haven't. Yes, my copy is, I'm going to move to one side. You can see my copy is a really beautiful one from Waterstones, but the book itself is what's important, and it is a stunningly written, very intriguing story that sent me on, again, a rabbit hole search to try and find out more information to find out what happened after the end of the book. And I honestly believe that is what makes it a really good story. So there is my countdown. Yes, I am very interested to find out if you liked any of these books, if you'd read any of these books, if you think I've missed something off that I should have done, if you've got any recommendations for me to add to my reading list for 2025, because I have no doubt I haven't got everything on there. I've got a few pre-orders on my list and I'm eagerly awaiting their arrival over the coming months. I think I've actually got pre-orders for as late as October next year. So if you think there's anything that I really should be reading and anything I haven't talked about, maybe I've read it and I haven't talked about it, please let me know and like this video, share it to get people coming back to my channel so I get a bigger audience and I can talk to more people about books. And please don't forget to leave your comments below, and I will see you really soon. Bye.